Right. So, as Dan said, my name's Colin Domoney. I've done a lot of things. I've currently CTO and co-founder of my own startup, not in the API space, but using APIs. I've written a book. I curate the API security.io newsletter. But mostly what I'm going to be talking to you about today is building an API security program. And the reason that I think I'm qualified to do this, and you're going to hear a lot of anecdotes, my own experience of doing this. I was a VP of ABAC at Deutsche Bank, building an ABAC program with 20,000 developers and 6,000 applications. I've done this at scale. I do a lot of consultancy work for a very large organizations. I'm currently engaged with a very large organization and with an API specific problem that they're dealing with. So a lot of this data comes from real world experience, and I hope this is going to be useful to folk. So let's move on to the what we're going to be talking about. So when I say rugged, this is an unusual term, and it does often puzzle people. What am I talking about when I say rugged? So I define rugged software as software that is beyond just being secure, right? We all know we've got to be secure, but what is rugged? So rugged, the term comes from the Rugged Manifesto. This is a pretty old manifesto, had some of the originals in the AppSec industry putting this thing together. People like Chris Wysopal from Veracode, Joshua Corman. And really, this states the importance of software in our modern world. And it's a rallying call to developers to build secure software, right? If you're building software systems, you've got a foundational role in making sure that you're building rugged systems. And those two, the second and third paragraph there are key important, right? And if you think about APIs, and we've had loads of people talking about the different attacks and the different risks that our APIs are facing. APIs are used in ways that you can't anticipate, right? They're used in ways that they weren't intended to be used, and they're attacked by talented and persistent adversaries. So going down that left-hand side, these are all the things we know we should be doing with our APIs, right? These are the table stakes. These are the things that we know we should do. These are the things you need to do to satisfy your regulator and your business. Move over to the right-hand side. These are the add-ons, the things that we can do to make our APIs rugged. And I try and encapsulate the value proposition there. These are the things that you do to delight your customers, to make sure that you protect your customers' data, right? So this is going above and beyond. So the way I framed the conversation, we've got a lot of content to get through. I'm not too worried about the time. These slides will be available. There's a lot of content. The content comes from chapter 13 of my book. I will make the slides available and other supplementary content when I get my website up. If you go to that website now, I think you'll find a placeholder, but we'll get that sorted for you. Follow me on LinkedIn and the like, and we'll get that done. So why do we need to be secure and rugged? I guess the advantage of coming late in the day is the fact that you've already heard from people about some of these issues. OWASP API Security Top 10 is kind of central. I think we know about that. But it's not just about the OWASP API Security Top 10. So we've seen cases. I edit this API security.io newsletter. I see how many vulnerabilities we have. We have issues with APIs that are being misused and abused, right? So they're not necessarily vulnerable, but clever attackers are learning how to use them in unusual ways. We have advanced attacks and bypasses. I'll have a look at some OAuth vulnerabilities that we've seen recently. My prediction for 2024 would be the year of large-scale token leakage and credential leakage. We'll look at some of that. And then what I'm calling API mega breaches. So let's look at these mega breaches. I have joined most of them. I know Brenton covered some of these. I think Bill also covered some of these. So we've had Optus, we've got T-Mobile, who are regularly feature in these kind of updates. And we have Twitter, right? And what was characteristic of these? These are organizations that lost all of their customer data records or allowed them to be exfiltrated, and where the breaches went undetected for long periods of time, right? So you've got a double whammy there. breaches that happen, then they don't know that that's happened. This is just snippets taken from the API security newsletter, the news headlines, and this is only in the last 5 months, 6 months, December, and this indicates the prevalence of leakage. So there's nothing wrong with these APIs, but what's happening is we're not making them rugged because we're leaking the credentials that allow access to those APIs. This is some great research from Salt Labs on even if you do the right thing, it's not always enough. Complex things like OAuth 2 protocol, these were very, very subtle vulnerabilities and flaws in the implementation, and these APIs that should have been rugged weren't because of minor implementation flaws, right? So continually challenging to actually build rugged systems. So when I talk about API security, one of the things, and I think this might be probably the first person today to talk about this, is for me and my experience in organizations is a lot of the problem with API security, it's not a technology problem, right? The technology is relatively easy compared to, and I think this is what came up in Katie's talk, web application security is a very, very broad church. API security, it's a far more bounded problem. So who owns this? So let's think about our API ownership models. So we've got IT operations people that can own system of record APIs. We've got business-owned APIs, and this is, I think, what we're talking about here. So these are APIs that are system of engagement, right? So this is where the innovation happens. This is where the business innovation happens. And then we've got platform APIs like HR systems. So now we've got a problem here because the animation is not going to work. What I was going to do here is I was going to show the people that are involved in owning API security, right? So we have business owners, we have product owners, we have developers. So typically when we talk, and Jose's talk earlier, he was focusing on shift left for developers. We normally talk about API security. We're normally looking at developers. So what I'm going to do now, sorry to just quickly, because this is going to be an issue with the lack of animation. So just humor me while I switch to where I can animate. And I'm just going to stop the presentation. Right, give me a moment. Okay, right. Normal service resumes. So when we're looking at who owns API security, so that's the simplified model. Developers produce APIs and they push them to operations, and security sits there wondering exactly what's happening. Now, let's expand that out a little bit. There's more owners than we can imagine. So we've got product owners who are responsible for the business need. We've got a DevSecOps team somewhere in the middle that are producing these APIs. We've got platform people. Eric had just spoken about platforms. We've probably got some API gateway people there. We've got governance sitting over the top of that as well. And let's blow that up further. That's very typical of the current organization that I'm working in. We have business owners, we have enterprise architects, we have SIM and SOC, we have identity and access management, we have a lot of data protection people in the security team, we have security champions. So who exactly there is owning the problem, right? So one of the things that's very important is to establish who's the owner of API security, and ultimately who's responsible for securing APIs. In my book, I've got a four-level maturity model. Very quickly here, we've got the simplest model, level 0, which is just slightly better than doing nothing. That is monitoring. So that's simply where we rely on the SIM and SOC to identify issues. If we improve that, we have the basics of a DevSecOps team. Level 2, and this is where we're getting quite advanced. This is what Jose addressed in the previous talk. This is shift left, where developers are starting to take responsibility. for securing the APIs in conjunction with their product owners and securing those APIs at coding and build time, certainly. And then hopefully we're all aspiring toward a rugged approach, which is the fully integrated. Right, this is where everybody gets involved. We've got platform architects who are working in conjunction with the product owner to make sure that they're securing those APIs by design. And then we've got all of the rest of the teams taking that responsibility. And we've got accountability both in the planning, coding, build, test stage, and then also at the operations stage where the CISO is accountable. But it's not only who owns your APIs, it's how do you build your API security team. If we don't know Adam Shostak, he is the threat modeling guru, and he wrote a really great blog on building your security team. So one of the things, if you're going to do API security, if you're going to do any kind of security at scale, you need a good team backing you, and you need to staff this team accordingly. Now, that little quote there that I've highlighted, but that it becomes a very labor-intensive activity. You need exceptional people with high specialist skills. Now, I don't think that's entirely true. So I kind of dug back through the history books, and I found a presentation that I did back in 2016 where I kind of capture this. What I did here is when I started my role at Deutsche Bank doing ABAC, I thought I needed some geeks. I thought I needed hackers. That's what I wanted. Human resources tended to bring me CISP-type people. No offense to CISP-type people, but they are expensive, and they're not necessarily ideally suited to working with developers. And what I actually found is I needed basically what I would call, junior analysts. And the key attributes in building your team, and this is really important because if you can't communicate with your developers, you're really going to struggle to make progress in your AppSec or your API initiative. You're looking for communications, you're looking for empathy, an eagerness to learn, understand how the organization works, and above all, be adaptable and flexible. Right, so we've had a look at the who. Now, let's get into the detail of how do you build your API security program. I framed the problem around 6 pillars. So inventory, we've spoken about inventory earlier. Challenging problem, Bill spoke about that. API design, API development, API testing, API protection at runtime, and API governance, which overarches those pillars. API security, it's not a point solution. I can't sell you a single product that is going to solve your API security problem. If we just look at that typical technology stack, we've got SaaS, DAST, SCA, we've got web application firewalls, we've got API gateway management platforms, we've got API security platforms. Right, not one of those covers all of our OWASP top 10, and that's just the OWASP top 10. That's nothing beyond that. Okay, so the takeaway here is that defense and depth, rely on defense and depth. Don't rely on any single solution there. I've written about the over-reliance on AppSec tools. I see this in my current organization. The view is if you're doing SAST and some DAST and maybe a bit of SCA, then you're probably going to be okay. That's simply not the case. I can pull out of the annals of history on APIsecurity.io. SAST and DAST would have been entirely useless against most of the breaches that have occurred in the last 2 years. Right? By all means, have them. Don't rely on them. I like this approach. This is the idea of building a landing zone for APIs. So one of the challenges that we have in being able to scale API security is the problem of heterogeneous environments, right? We have lots of different technology stacks. We have lots of different tools involved. The idea is build a landing zone, well architected, have very standard architecture, standard frameworks. I'm lucky enough in my current organization, they've tended to focus on Python with fast API. It's one set of problems to solve. And the advantages of that you can scale, you can solve the problem once rather than having to solve it 24 different times for different platforms and systems. Okay, so that's just typical, and that I just happen to pick a load of tools and tech there. This obviously only works in greenfield. It's not, if you've got an existing legacy problem, it's a much harder problem to solve. I'll move through this very briefly. So we've got some best practices for each of those pillars. Those are pretty obvious. I will skip that. Now there's loads of things that you can do on each of those pillars. Let's get into the what are you going to be securing, right? So Bill spoke about the inventory problems as the Rumsfeld problem, the known unknowns and the unknown knowns, etc. The question was asked in one of the chats. I enjoyed the discussion on that. Building the inventory. So the most common thing, and it's surprisingly effective, is just go around and ask people. Right? Ask them what APIs they own or where their API inventory might be stored. There's often other indicators, like, for instance, the data protection people might have their own inventory. So go and ask if there's any tertiary or derivative inventories that you can access. The best one, the most effective way, is check in with your gateway or cloud team. So these APIs typically will, if you've got a gateway, it'll be running, the APIs will be routed through the gateway, certainly external ones, or will be cloud hosted, right? So that's a good place to look. Network scanning, look in your code repos for API footprints, check your proxy and traffic logs. Not all APIs are created equally. Prioritize your APIs. If you've got, I heard a number, 15,000 APIs, not every one of those needs to be secured to the same degree. So pick your battles, right? And use things like, what is your data sensitivity? What level of access control do you need on those APIs, right? And then focus your efforts on your most critical or your most important APIs. Going wide, going deep. Sometimes you need a bit of both. An example of going wide is scanning all your APIs to verify that TLS is implemented correctly and you've got some kind of authentication. Going deep, do a pen test or code review. At various times, you will need both of those elements, right? Know when to use which one and know the shortcomings of the respective methods. Animation time. So how do you scale your API security program? So let's imagine we've got your percentage of APIs on your y-axis, and on the right, you've got the passing of time. People often do this. They try and do everything in one go. And what happens is they build up too much technical debt, too many findings. The program stalls, crashes, and burns. You don't want to do that. They start slow and they stay slow. They fail to gain momentum. They don't track properly, and the program stagnates. Doing nothing, analysis paralysis, right? People are overwhelmed by the sense of the problem, and they don't really make a start. That's typically what works. A slow and steady, phased and incremental approach. The important thing here is you can measure your success along the way, and most importantly, you can go and justify more money and more budget. Pick your battles when it comes to remediation. Certain API vulnerabilities are easier to solve than others. Others are more worthwhile solving. Don't necessarily try and fix everything. Understand the trade-off you have between risk and your actual effort to fix. KPIs. Important to track and measure your KPIs and dashboard and report them somewhere. There's KPIs that you can think of for your APIs right across the SDLC. There's just a sample of these. And what I will do, and I will make available, is I've developed my own black book list of over 150 of these KPIs, different ways of measuring them. I'll make this available on my website when I get that available. This is something I want people to be using. I want people to be choosing sensible APIs and get making progress with the APIs and measurement. I think this is really one of the key things with APIs, is to make sure that they're measuring progress, because without any progress, you're going to lose your budgets. Right, and let's just wrap up now quickly. I have the final W, the when. When are you starting? If not now, when? Right, the way I'm a bit of a movie meme guy. I like my movies. I had to get in a Big Lebowski in there. This is your time. This is your place. Get started on this. I think that first one's important. Anything that you do, anything positive that you do, is going to improve your security posture. And that reflects nicely to Pareto's law, 80-20 law. You know, a lot of these small APIs, particularly, there's so many quick wins for APIs, like just checking that you don't accidentally have unauthenticated APIs drifting around in your code base. There's so many quick wins that you can get. You know, you make sure that you're spending that 20% of your effort and getting the rewards on that. Quick wins are important, particularly in large and complex organizations. You know, make sure that you're demonstrating success and progress. Use those KPIs to track your progress and readjust your strategy and your focus when it needs to, and be sure that you are celebrating those wins. Learning more. So the API security newsletter, I hardly need to introduce the middle item. The last one is my book as well. What we've looked at here today is pretty much chapter 13, which was the conclusion, and that's how to build a scalable API security program. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Colin. Really enjoyed that conversation, that presentation a ton here, and actually there's quite a bit of activity here. I'm going to throw a couple Dana comments in here because he's always so interesting. So 150, I'm referring to your KPIs. You know, that's definitely, you know, a lot to chew on. And then another comment from Colin: if you could only have one KPI, what would it be?
One KPI, it would be
tough question there.
It is a tough question. It would be, I would probably run, if I'm honest, I would run something like SemGrep or some kind of static analysis tool, just to look for things like unauthenticated endpoints, improper. You know, we had the great talk on JOT token vulnerabilities. A lot of those can be easily detected with just very simple grepping. SemGrep is the tool that's springing to mind. So that's what I would use. That's the one KPI, and then I would just look at coverage.
Yeah, good. And some pretty heady endorsement here from Dana on your book. So definitely, everyone, highly recommend you go check out Colin's book. It's a great read. All right, we got time for a few more here. So let's go to. How about this one from Ranbir? What design frameworks a security baseline reference document should be preferred for designing secure APIs during the design phase?
Yes, that's a great question. I don't know if I said the collective we, are doing a particularly good job of this. I think I'm not going to point fingers at OWASP, but I think while the OWASP top 10 is very good at explaining the vulnerabilities and what the top 10 is, I think we're lacking in secure guidance and ways to use them. This is kind of the vision I had for the book, but then I ran out of pages to put all that detail into. Is for each of the frameworks and languages, there's very good patterns and recommendations for best practice and things that we should be doing right. So I think you know, the OWASP folk have great cheat sheets on you know, a lot of these topics, but I don't think they're specific enough for APIs. So I think we could bolster that, and we probably should. Here's a good question. Thanks.
Yeah, your session's getting some really awesome questions. You're here from Emil regarding roles. What's the reason to have IT security as responsible for operate in SDLC?
So I think it's just tradition. It's not tradition. It's just how things have evolved. And I mean, I'm kind of straddle all. I've got a stake in every camp here, but I think security people, I think they've traditionally come from a networky infrastructure type of background, so they're more, just speaking very broad brush, they're more comfortable with the operate side, and they tend to get flummoxed when it comes down to JOT token validation, for argument's sake. That's less of a happy hunting ground. So I think it's how that delineation tends to break down, is that the IT people will tend to deal with the operate side. But of course, those boundaries are being blurred. In any good or progressive organization, they should be those things should be merging, right?
I don't know if you see here the comment here from Dana. Oh, WASP.
Yep, I do.
Yeah, what are your thoughts there? Is that you agree?
Yeah, I like the ASVS. Daniel Cuthbert does a fantastic job on that with the rest of the oils guys. So I shall go and I should have included that in the book, but there's always the next edition.
There's always another book.
Exactly.
You made some comments that I found interesting. One was around SAST and DAST. I think you said they're kind of useless on APIs.
I did say that, and I thought, and then I made sure that I wasn't speaking out of turn. I used to work. I'm a big fan of SAST and DAST. Well,
sure.
SAST certainly. I'm just thinking of the type of vulnerabilities that we've had. The ones that we've highlighted. It's Bowler. I mean, SAST isn't going to find Bowler. It isn't going to find broken authentication.
Yeah,
it'll find injection attacks.
Sure.
Just fine. But it's again, that's that defense in depth, as many of these things as possible, as many indicators of risk or vulnerability. But then you have to be careful, because then you run the danger of generating too much noise.
Yeah.
And then the problem comes that you swamp your team, and then people give up, and hands get thrown in the air, and you lose your budget. So it's a delicate it's a delicate one to judge.
When you were saying like SAST can find, injection, right? That's a code flaw, but not authentication. Is that because that's an implementation? That's a runtime?
Well, if we just take the example of authentication, if we're looking at I need Jose here to tell me how to do this in Python, but you do it with a decorator that would say something, and then the SAST is just not going to be aware of, I speaking slightly out of turn, but generally the SAST is going to be looking at code, and it's going to be compiling that to a model and then working through data flows. It's just not going to recognize what a decorator is doing, and not unless it's something pretty special. And then it just won't know about what that decorator means in the context of that. But that's where SemGrep is great. If people aren't familiar with SemGrep is like grep, so it can scan source code incredibly quickly, and it's got a set of semantic rules that you can write for it. So you're able to write rules to look for things like, are you using a JWT token without having called the verify method? Do you have an API endpoint that doesn't have an authenticate decorator on it? But it means somebody's got to write those rules. So again, to Dana's point, that's a good one, is we should be, we should be writing, note to self, we should be writing rule sets for SemGrep to codify all of these things.
Super, super interesting. And I loved your comment about building an inventory, go around and ask people. I think that's maybe one of the most overlooked techniques of building inventory. There's such a rush to let's instrument and sniff them out and scan code repos and so forth. But just going around and talking to people, that also works.
Yep. I mean, we say we don't know what APIs we have, but the shadow APIs somebody knows. You just got to find those people.
It's funny. When I talk to security teams, they say we don't know what we've got. I'm like, if your VP of engineering was in the room, would they say that too? Well, we're running out of time here, Colin, and there's the tool, the questions keep flowing here. So we're just gonna have to bring you back, I think, and do some more sessions with you.
It's a shame. Fantastic. I really appreciate the time today, and just overwhelmed by the kind of the response I've had, and I think we've all had. Good stuff.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Colin.